difficult to even imagine that situation, let alone live the reality of it. But for some children in that desperately horrible case, one painful answer could be to consider euthanasia. Well, today, Belgium is expected to approve, to legalize medically assisted suicide for minors. Euthanasia for adults has been legal in Belgium already for the past 11 years. That parliamentary vote today could usher in that unprecedented step of abolishing age restrictions on who can ask to be put to death.
Should terminally ill children be allowed the right to request their own death? Belgian lawmakers tussled over the tough ethical decision ahead of a vote on Thursday. Backers say it's about the freedom to choose to die in dignity.
It's about extremely complex situations. We're trying to provide a framework here for situations that actually exist in practice. To give children rights and freedom of choice. To give parents freedom and safety. And to give the medical corps the law they're asking for.
Though a recent poll found 75% of Belgians in favour, there have been some vocal street protests. If the legislation's adopted, children under 18 suffering unbearable physical pain and already close to death could request euthanasia if their parents agreed. 3 doctors and a psychologist would then have to agree the child was aware of the consequences of their decision. Opponents say it's too much pressure to put on a terminally ill child.
Children, just as adults, can be influenced by those around them. We should ask ourselves whether children have enough awareness of what dying means, that it's irreversible, that you can't go back.
Opponents also argue Belgium's one of the best equipped countries for alleviating terminally ill children's pain until their illness runs its course. The Senate adopted the legislation by a wide margin in December. If it passes in the House, all that would remain for child euthanasia to become legal in Belgium is the King's signature, usually a formality.
Well, joining me on today's Inside Look is LAURENCE, LWOFF. You're the Secretary of the Committee on Bioethics at the European Council Human Rights Directory. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. The Human Rights Directory is currently writing a guide with guidelines for both professionals and families about euthanasia. Tell us about this. This issue is obviously such a hot-button one, all the more so when it has to do with children like here in Belgium. In your experience, is a child, or a child's parents for that matter, capable of making such a decision?
I think that I have to correct what you announced at the beginning. We are not drafting guidelines. We have actually approved a guide which aimed at facilitating principles that have been agreed at European level on the protection of patients. And it is not about euthanasia. It's about decisions that in end-of-life situations concern medical treatment, which is the vast majority of end-of-life decisions. The issue of euthanasia and assisted suicide is certainly hitting the news regularly, but it remained a very limited number of situations, and some countries have allowed those procedures and have provided legislation for that. That was not the focus of the work done by the Council of Europe, again, which focuses on the majority of situations and content in end of life, which concerns decisions on medical treatment. I think the central questions that the Council of Europe and the Committee on Bioethics was willing to address is relating to common challenges that countries in Europe are actually encountering, not only in Europe, actually. And it's linked to a positive sign, which is the improvement of living conditions and medical progress, which make people living longer, and the prospect of survival to disease is greatly improved. So those are positive signs. But at the same time, it leads to situations where you have an aging population. According to Eurostat, you have, in the last 50 years, life expectancy have increased by about 10 years in average. Disease that used to be acute and fast progressing diseases are transformed into chronic disease with low progression, leading to situations in end-of-life situations which are becoming more complex, with people more vulnerable and often with limited capacity to participate in the decision that concern them. That was the focus of the work that the Council of Europe has undertaken. And at the center of that consideration is the issue of protection of autonomy and human dignity, and how to ensure the protection of those rights and fundamental value in the framework of the decisions taken on medical treatment when the person is affected in its capacity to take themselves the decisions, which remain a fundamental principle. The patient has to remain at the center of that decision.
What kind of guidelines exactly? What can you do to ensure that these guidelines are followed? I'm thinking of the case here in France of Vincent Lambert, that young man who's been in minimal consciousness in a hospital for the past 5 years. That's led to a massive family conflict that's gone all the way up to the top of a French administrative court here in France. What in your guide, what kind of guidelines could have been given to avoid the kind of situation that family finds itself in now?
Well, the guidelines are not a legal instrument. It's really a guide, and the idea is to transpose what are agreed principles at European level in a language and in relation to the clinical situation encountered. So what the guide is doing is providing references points to explain the different steps, to talk about the procedure for the decisions to be taken. It does not talk about the content of that decision, but it says about the role of the families, of the medical team, of the previously expressed wishes of the person of trust when the patient has designated a person's. It explains how when the patient is not anymore in a position to participate, or if this participation is capacity to participate is affected, or if the person doesn't want to take that decisions, how the collective procedure involving the different members of the medical team, but also the family and those close to the patients, are involved in this process to get as close as possible to what would be the wishes of the persons, taking obviously into account the medical situation, but also the wishes of the persons, the particular situation of the persons, the implication for the life quality, so other aspects that may not be purely medical.
All right. Thank you for that, Laurence LWOFF, Secretary of the Committee on Bioethics at the European Council Human Rights Directory. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right.
Bye-bye.
You are watching France 24. Now for you, the latest from the Winter Olympics in Sochi in sport. First, though,